If you ask 100 people what's the best way to cook bacon, you might get 50 different answers. People each have their own little idiosyncrasies of how they like to do it. Today we're gonna dig in deep, try and find out stovetop versus oven, parchment paper versus wire racks, many other questions. We're gonna try and answer as much as we can. The baseline test is gonna be cold bacon straight from the fridge on parchment paper in 400-degree oven, and then cold bacon straight from the fridge in a room temp cast iron skillet that we're gonna bring up to heat on the stovetop. Going into this test, I have a little bit of a bias. I generally prefer the sheet tray for a few reasons. I think it feeds a crowd, whereas the stovetop, you have to cook it in batches. I also think the stovetop, you're doing active cooking. You're hovering over this thing and flipping it and monitoring it. When the bacon goes on a sheet tray in the oven, you can sort of relax and let it cook. The drawback to the oven method is that it takes a little bit longer. If you're need bacon immediately, the stovetop is probably the best. I'm expecting that the bacon on the stovetop will finish maybe 10 minutes faster than the bacon in the oven, but if this makes a big mess on the stovetop that you're cleaning up, is that 10 minutes worth it? You know, that's something we'll talk about. Welcome, Ella.
Smells good already.
Well, bacon always smells good.
So is it just this?
There's one batch going in the stovetop, and then there's one batch going in the oven.
A face-off.
And those are sort of like our preliminary tests.
Uh-huh.
And then we're gonna even dig deeper later in this episode.
You know I love a deep dive on bacon.
Yeah, well, you're the famous bacon author these days. Now, when you were testing bacon in the skillet, did you change the heat? Did you start on a higher heat and then lower it? What was your thinking on that?
Yeah, so I started at a room temp skillet so that the fat could render really easily and kind of slowly off of the bacon at just kind of an even rate, so that it wasn't sort of like fatty in some places and super crunchy in others.
Right.
But obviously, you know, there's still gonna be less even rendering with the stovetop method than what you'd get with the oven.
Yeah. So I wrote down a few criteria that I'm evaluating the bacon on today, and I want to get your opinion on it. One is how evenly it cooks, like uniformity.
Right.
How long it takes to cook is a factor.
Important.
Splatter / cleanup. How annoying is it to clean up after you've finished your cooking?
Right.
Active versus passive cooking is a big one for me. And then the final category I have is, does it feed a crowd?
Okay.
So another limitation, I think, in terms of the stovetop is there's only so much bacon you can fit in at one time.
Right, assuming you just have one skillet going.
Right, yeah, I could have multiple skillets.
Did I show my hand?
So just, taking a step back, stovetop versus oven, do you have any preliminary feelings or opinions, preferences?
I have so many feelings and opinions and preferences. I would say, of course, the oven is an objectively better method if you're looking for total consistency and you're cooking in bulk, like you've invited all of these people over and you're an organized person that woke up early and preheated your oven, and you have all these sheet pans. I think for my life, I really prefer the stovetop method, both because I love the flavor that you get when you can really char something on a well-seasoned cast iron skillet, and because even though I'd like to be, I'm not the sort of person who's gonna, wake up on a Sunday and preheat the oven. Like, I need bacon ASAP.
Preheating the oven is an interesting component that I didn't think of, to be honest. We already had the oven going because we're working, it's like an active kitchen. But it would add even more time if you start the oven, it takes 10 or 15 minutes to get hot before
20.
you even add the bacon in.
Right.
Now, some people like that little softer piece of fat on the edge, and some people want it crispy the whole way. Do you have an opinion on that?
Obviously, I like the little bit of fat on the end.
When I was younger, that was my favorite part of bacon.
I think it depends on the context. If it's for a BLT, probably I would want a little bit more consistency and more crisp.
Yeah.
But if I'm just eating bacon, I want the
that's
fat
a good
piece.
point. You know what? Because on a BLT, you want crispy bacon. But if you're just eating it off a plate.
Or out of a skillet.
Yeah. Now, some people will dry their bacon on a paper towel, sort of sop up the grease. I think I would just take it and throw it on a plate and eat it. That's my personal approach.
Especially if it's going on a sandwich or something, I kind of want to keep the extra rendered fat.
Yeah, fat is flavor. So the major advantage to the stovetop is this bacon is ready. We can be eating bacon, whereas if I was cooking it just on the sheet tray, we'd still be waiting to eat our bacon. So that's
Like drinking coffee, where's the bacon?
yeah, exactly. Pacing around.
In pajamas.
So this is our sheet tray bacon.
Ooh.
It looks a touch crispier. It got a little darker maybe than the skillet one.
Did get more color.
Yeah, but you know what? If we wanted, we were sort of going for a little bit chewy on the skillet. So you
For
control your own destiny on the stovetop. If we wanted to make this a little bit darker, we could have. But you run the risk of it sort of scorching in certain areas and
Right.
staying slightly undercooked in other areas. But you mentioned that you even appreciate that
I do.
aspect to it, where some areas have a little more depth, darkness, or crispiness.
I like my bacon to have a personality
Okay.
and depth. These look great. They all look the same from the oven.
Yeah. Should we taste it?
I would love to taste
All right,
it.
let's do it. I'm gonna start with the skillet bacon.
I'm gonna start with the oven bacon.
Oh.
Very crispy. What do you think?
I'm very happy eating bacon.
Forgot we were doing this.
You know, we were complaining a little bit, or I was, about like, oh, it's inconsistent in the skillet potentially. This tastes totally fine. I mean, it's not like some parts are burnt and other parts are raw.
Right.
It's delicious. Even if it looks slightly yet less uniform than the oven, it's still pretty much uniformly cooked.
You've convinced me. I'm trying this one. See, this is the sort of little fat part at the end I love that I was talking about.
Yeah, something like this here at the end.
Uh-huh.
Which still has a little bit of kind of bounce to it. I actually would prefer this maybe 1 or 2 minutes less cooked.
I agree.
This is a touch too crispy. Or
And I think
some people like it this way, but
And I think it crisped up even more because we left it on the pan. I guess if we wanted to be perfectionists, we could have used those cool tongs and moved it over to a rack or a paper towel
that's a good
and
point.
plate.
The longer it stays on the sheet tray, it'll continue to carry over if you take it off right away.
I'm certainly not complaining about either batch, and I would love to eat them all. So what are you doing next?
We're gonna test one batch of bacon straight from the fridge versus a batch that's been at room temp
Okay.
to see if there's a difference there. We're gonna test a cast iron versus a non-stick, and then we're gonna do a wire rack versus parchment on the
Okay.
sheet tray. And then the final test, we're gonna do 325 versus 400. Test number 1. This batch of bacon is straight from the fridge, it's cold. This batch of bacon has been sitting out for about 30 minutes. It's at room temperature. We're gonna cook them side by side and see if there's a difference. Does it matter if your bacon is cold from the fridge or if it's at room temp? This is test number 2. We're doing a non-stick skillet versus a cast iron. I suspect that the non-stick will be a little bit easier to flip the bacon and maneuver it around in the pan. Although maybe the cast iron will have a little bit more crispiness, more char. We'll see which one we prefer. This is test number 3. We're doing one sheet tray lined with parchment paper versus another sheet tray lined with a wire rack. Now, my suspicion is that the wire rack is gonna allow this bacon to be a little crispier, whereas this could potentially be soggy because it's sort of gonna sit in its own fat. These are gonna be cooked head to head, both at 400 degrees for 16 to 18 minutes, depending on your oven. This is test number 4. We're going to cook one batch of bacon in the oven at 400 degrees and the next batch of bacon in the oven at 325. My suspicion is that the 325 is actually gonna be better texture, where it's crispy on the outside but still a little chewy, whereas 400 degrees you're gonna get crispy throughout, more of a hard crisp, although we'll see at the end of the test. I'm personally invested in this test because I like to cook bacon at a lower temperature, around 325. Now you're a bacon enthusiast, right?
I have been called that, yes.
So this is exciting for you, I imagine.
This is probably the best day of my life.
Bacon that was straight from the fridge versus bacon that was out at room temperature, if there's a difference there. I think that potentially the room temp bacon might have crisped a little more,
Yeah.
but we'll see. Non-stick skillet versus cast iron. That was pretty similar. I imagine we might not be able to taste a difference. The wire rack versus the parchment in the oven. I think the wire rack potentially could be a little more crispy there.
Yeah,
but
you can definitely
we'll
tell those
see.
didn't like shrink at all.
Yeah.
So, even
Oh,
cook.
that's interesting. On the parchment, it would like shrivel,
Yeah.
but the wire rack, it would stay flat.
Yeah.
And then a lower temperature versus a higher temperature in the oven. In your own home life, do you have a favorite way of cooking bacon?
I will say that I grew up and I was a very strict, fry pan only. That's how I grew up. That's the way I made bacon. Probably until college or maybe even after college. For me, it was crazy to hear that people cook their bacon in the oven because I'd never heard that or never seen anyone cook it that way.
Yeah.
Like microwave, that's even crazier. I don't even
We didn't even talk about that.
I don't even
on
talk
this-
about cooking
no,
bacon.
that was,
It's not
We're on the
happening.
same page with that.
But once I started cooking in the oven, you're right, that's why I started to do it, because you could turn the oven on, put the bacon in. It takes longer, so you could still have another 20 minutes before you actually need to start, the rest of it. So I've switched from the stovetop and I've committed to the oven cooking, so I'll put it in. I typically do like 375 to 400 if I'm not, trying to take forever.
Right.
I'm like 20 minutes in, I'll toast the bread and start doing everything else. And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
by the time everything else is ready, bacon's out of the oven and it's perfect time to eat.
Part of the reason why I like the oven too is I think you can cook more at once in the oven.
100% you can
Two
cook more.
full sheet trays of bacon in the oven is gotta be more than you could do on the stove.
Yeah,
Even
and
with multiple
such a good
skillets.
point.
on the
And
stovetop.
in stovetop, one of the benefits to the oven, like, and kind of how this one looks, it stays in shape. And when you're in a stovetop, like you said, it's more active.
Yeah.
And you're flipping,
It
but you're
doesn't
also
always fit
rearranging
perfectly
it.
in the
Yeah, and
pan.
then there's always the part of the pan that's hotter, so then you're
Yeah,
adjusting.
exactly.
It's a lot of work.
We're on the same page
But I'm
here.
committed to the work.
So should we taste some bacon?
Yes.
Yeah, I've been waiting for someone to ask me that question.
Oh my gosh, yes.
So test number one.
That's crispy. Very crispy.
Very similar.
Yeah, I'd say they're both very crispy. Yeah.
I think the fridge one could potentially be a little bit softer.
I was gonna. There's like a difference, and I feel like I don't know. That one looks crispier in the middle too when you look at it.
Right.
But I'd say both of those are pretty even in terms of just crispiness, and even like the cook on the softer parts. It's very similar.
Pretty similar. So based on that, I would say just keep it in the fridge and cook
Yeah,
it.
doesn't matter. Keep it in the fridge.
Right.
Take it out and then cook it.
Non-stick skillet versus a cast iron skillet.
I want to use the word earthy, which isn't the right word, because none of this is from the earth. You know what I mean?
There's like a little something going on
Yeah,
the
it's
cast
got
iron.
almost like a little grittier. Probably that like love that cast iron just.
Little pops of higher heat could give it a little
Yeah.
deeper color, flavor.
Yeah, I liked that. I
Yeah.
did like that one. Or I could
It's
tell
a,
the difference.
It's a subtle
here.
thing, but I think you're right.
Yeah.
Okay, wire rack versus parchment paper. This
Already
should be
know
more straightforward.
visually, these look different.
And they look very different than the skillet ones.
Mm-hmm.
They're much flatter.
Yep. And because on the wire rack, like that all around cook.
This
So
is
very,
so good.
very crispy.
I'm really enjoying myself here.
This is the best. Like this is 10 out of 10 crisp.
I think it has a little more delicacy to it than some of the skillet ones, so to be honest.
Yeah, it's like crispy but still soft.
That's my preferred texture. This was
It's good.
maybe my favorite so far. 325 versus 400. Now, I'm gonna admit, when I cook bacon at home, I cook it at a lower temperature. This is like my home bacon. This did take maybe 5 or 6 more minutes than the 400-degree one.
Okay. Not
So
too
it's-
much. Not too bad.
Yeah, it's even longer than the skillet, but
It's good.
chewier texture.
Yeah, that's good.
When it's less crispy, I think you could almost taste the bacon flavor a little bit more. Like I'm like immersed in the bacon here.
Did you get it? When it's crispy, it's just like crunch.
Yeah,
That's it.
it's
Like,
there and it's gone. This one lingers, I want to say.
Bacon grease is your friend.
Wow, there's a lot to think about. These are different, you know?
It is.
This-
They're all very different.
Yeah.
I thought I'd change into something a bit more on theme for the rest of this.
Now you're ready to really make a decision
I am.
to judge.
I feel at home, This proves I really care about bacon.
Yeah. So, out of all of these bacons, Can you choose one or two that you think are your favorites?
Yes, I mean, I'd like to first say that while I love all bacon, never choose. I think that
They're all my.
these are all my children
Yeah.
that I love equally. I like the nonstick stovetop. It's really like crispy, but you still get, we were talking about like some of that like flavor and stuff that comes in from the having like grease and it not just be completely crispy.
Right.
And then these, I guess, because it's also the way I'm used to cooking my bacon,
Yeah.
but the oven, just put it in the oven, it just tastes so good. It's still got, it's got some crunch, but it's still crispy and juicy. What about you?
My head is spinning right now. I feel like so many choices. I was expecting to like the wire rack more than I did.
I actually was coming into this thinking that would be my number one
Yeah,
because
but
of the even cook.
It didn't do it for me.
It's the-
And also, wire racks are really annoying to clean.
Yes, they are.
Even
and
if
honestly,
it-
I stopped cooking bacon on a wire rack.
Yeah,
because
'cause
I
there's
got
all
tired
those
of
little-
scraping it.
Yeah. So,
True.
forget that.
No.
Now, on the right day in the right context, the char from the cast iron would
Yes.
be right for
A
me.
BLT?
Exactly.
So good.
And then the familiarity, like this is
Yes.
what I'm used to, is what I prefer.
Yeah.
It's $3.25. I like the flavor of the parchment paper though.
Yes.
That it was sort of like
It's
sitting in its own bacon fat. Nothing wrong with that. I had a lot of fun. This was great.
Best day ever.
For the folks at home, if you enjoy bacon as much as Danielle here, click like, click subscribe, and we'll see you next time.